Tuesday, 7 p.m. Marianne set her mug on the counter and turned the phone face up beside it. She had brewed the coffee 5 minutes early on purpose, the way Garrett liked their life, 5 minutes ahead of trouble. The screensaver clock glowed steady. The house hummed with small sounds. The refrigerator motor, a vent clicking on, the soft tick of the wall clock that never seemed loud until you were listening for something else. She'd promised herself not to stare. She stared anyway. The call should come at 7. That was the plan. It was always the plan. Garrett made plans the way other people said prayers. He kept a yellow notepad on the garage workbench with columns and tiny boxes to check off. He called them redundancies. We don't fight nature, he would say. We don't argue with it. We make room for it. He had said that the night before he and Della left for the Wind River Range. He said it like a rule. Calm and sure, like all the rules that had kept them safe for years. 3. No call. Marianne lifted the mug. The coffee was already cooling. She set it down and wiped a circle of moisture off the counter with the edge of her palm. She told herself the mountain didn't keep office hours. Rock took the time it wanted. A pitch could run long. A ledge could be smaller than the guidebook said. Batteries dipped faster in cold air. There were a dozen ordinary reasons. She opened the last text from Della anyway, even though she knew every word by heart. Starting the approach, see you in a few days. Love you. The words felt bright and warm in her hand like sun on old wood. 19, all laughter and speed, but careful because her father was careful. Della copied him without meaning to. She checked her knots twice. She packed, then repacked, counted 12, no call. The house felt too large. It had the strange stillness of a church after everyone leaves. She moved through it to keep from listening to the clock. She straightened a picture frame on the hallway wall. She folded a throw blanket on the back of the couch. She picked up a sock that had fallen behind the dryer days ago and wondered how long it had been there. Small tasks, small control. She poured the coffee into the sink and brewed fresh as if a new pot might reset the evening. Steam fogged the window above the faucet. The porch light snapped on with the timer and spilled a thin cone across the steps. Somewhere down the street a dog barked, 2 short barks, then silence. The silence felt different now. Not the easy kind. The held breath kind. 25. She let the phone ring once to check the signal, then locked it again. She didn't call. They had a plan about that too. If the mountain stole focus, you didn't make people look down at a screen. You waited for the check-in. You trusted the system. Trust was part of the safety. By 8, Marianne had built an entire stack of reasons and set them one by one between herself and fear. She ate half a piece of toast she couldn't taste. She checked the weather in a browser tab she had promised not to open. Clear over Lander, windy higher up. Windy was a vague word, and vague words did not help. By 9, the clock felt louder than the vent. She carried her phone from room to room like it was a fragile thing. She sat on the edge of the bed where Garrett kept his hiking socks, folded in pairs, heel tags aligned. She thought of him tying his boots in the doorway that morning, quiet so he wouldn't wake her. She thought of Della, one boot on, one boot off, talking fast about a song stuck in her head. At 10, she set an alarm for midnight. If there was no call by then, she would try to sleep and call the sheriff in the morning. That felt like another rule. Don't cry wolf in the night. Wait for daylight and say the facts in a clear voice. She rehearsed the facts in her mind. Names, ages, route, the time the call was supposed to come. She turned off the lamp. The house didn't change. It only darkened. The tick of the clock kept its pace. Her phone lay on the nightstand, screen black like a small closed door. If Garrett planned for everything, why did silence arrive right on time? Deputy Miles Corbin left the paved road behind and felt the cruiser loosen under him on washboard dirt. Dust rose in a thin, constant cloud that flattened the late afternoon sun. The Wind River Range lifted ahead, granite teeth above a forest that swallowed sound. He kept one hand light on the wheel, the other on the radio mic, listening to routine traffic that made this drive feel less empty. The last cattle guard clanged under the tires. A wooden sign, Big Sandy Trailhead, flashed by. Then the trees opened into a rough, rutted lot cut from pine and aspen. A few vehicles sat spaced like islands. He rolled slow, reading plates out of habit, scanning colors and shapes against the note in his pocket. Dark green F-150, Wyoming plate, a film of dust, pollen tracing the edges. He parked nose to nose and stepped out. The air was thinner here, cooler with that clean, sap-sweet bite you only get near timberline. He stood for a second and listened. Wind in the crowns, a jay. No voices, no boots on gravel. No late hikers hustling for the last light. Up close, the truck looked like it had settled into the place it was left. A few yellow aspen leaves had drifted into the gap where the windshield met the hood. The tires wore a skin of powdered road. No smashed glass. No drag marks. Nothing out of place. He ran the plate anyway. The return blinked in. Registered to Garrett Beckwith Lander. Corbin wrote the time in his notebook and let out a breath he hadn't noticed he was holding. Finding the vehicle was step one. It meant the report was real, not a mix-up, not a wrong trailhead. It meant the mountain had two of theirs. He tried the driver's door, unlocked. Not unusual out here. He opened it a careful inch the way you do when you're not sure what you're going to smell. Stale coffee, a hint of pine air freshener. The cab was tidy, Spartan even. Floor clean. No fast food bags, no tossed clothes. On the passenger seat, a folded paper map with creases worn to white and a small guidebook to the Wind River Range with a cracked spine. He leaned in farther, scanning the dash, the console, the cup holders. People left notes when they changed plans. Sometimes they slid them under a wiper blade, sometimes they tucked them into obvious places so a spouse would find them. Nothing. He popped the center console. Spare batteries. A headlamp. A handful of quarters and a green pen. He closed it and sat back on his heels, eyes falling to the glove box. He pressed the latch. The door fell open with a soft thud. Registration, owner's manual. And there, nestled between paper, two black rectangles. Sleek, scuffed at the edges. The kind of weight you recognize when you've carried them before. Satellite phones. For a beat he only stared. Then training took over. He lifted one with the same care he would use to lift a newborn's wrist for a pulse. He tapped the power. The screen woke at once, full battery clean signal icon. He tried the second. Same result. Not dead, not damaged, present, waiting. The lot felt quieter. He could hear his own breath as he keyed his radio. Dispatch, Corbin. I've got the Beckwith vehicle at Big Sandy. No sign of subjects. Copy 2 sat phones in the glove box. Both powered. Both appeared charged. The reply came back steady, professional, but he could hear the slight hitch. How that one detail twisted the shape of the call. If you prepare like this man prepared, you don't forget lifelines. If you do forget them, what else went wrong? If you left them on purpose, why? He photographed everything. Exterior, plates, interior, glove box, the angle of the phones against the manual. He shut the door and stood in the gravel, pen moving through the facts. Truck confirmed. No damage, cab orderly. Phones located. Weather clear. Light dropping. Behind him, the trees moved in one slow body. The mountain above did not care. He logged the time again and looked once more at the glove box, as if the answer might crawl out and sit in his palm. A rescue had just become something else. One detail made a rescue feel like a riddle. By mid-morning, the trailhead had changed shape. Pickups boxed in a hastily erected canopy. A plywood table sagged under radios, spare headlamps, laminated maps. Coffee steamed in paper cups. The search and rescue commander, gray stubble, wind-burned. Cheeks drew lines with a grease pencil across topo quads taped to hoods. Contour lines stacked like fingerprints. He spoke in short sentences. Probables first, possibles later. Probables were the lines anyone would take. The standard approach drainages. The basin below the south face. The common descent gullies you could find in guidebooks and old trip reports. Possibles were everything else. Faint goat paths, obscure traverses, undocumented ledges that only show themselves when you are already committed. He boxed both categories with the pencil, then wrote times and team initials in the margins. The first helicopter lifted off and the thud of the rotors rolled across the trees. The ship banked toward Hooker, shrinking to a dark insect against sky. In the cabin, a spotter scanned the world through an open door, tethered to the frame by a short line. He kept his eyes moving the way they trained for avalanche debris. Scan, reset, scan. Look for what doesn't belong. A corner of tent fabric, a flash of nylon, a coil of rope that caught light. From the air, the mountain refused to be a simple peak. It was a complex of walls and bowls, couloirs plunging like elevator shafts, shelves no wider than a boot's length. Shadows pooled in cirques. Sun flared off snowfields that lingered in late summer shade. The pilot flew grid lines, a lawnmower pattern across stone miles high. Headset chatter stayed clipped and flat. Nothing on the apron. Copy. Swing west. Hit the traverse band. On the ground, teams moved like beads along strings. Radio checks, bearings, pace counts. Calls into the wind. Garrett, Della. Names carried and broke against granite. They left small markers, bright tape on a willow branch, a numbered flag near a boulder, breadcrumbs for their own memory. They glassed the faces with binoculars until eyes watered, turning each speck into maybe. By noon, a second helicopter joined and the valley sounded like a slow drum. The command post marked what had been seen and, more importantly, what had not. No tent, no clothing, no bright gear stashed below a climb. The probables got a slow, heavy strike-through. The pencil moved to the odd lines, the places where an experienced climber might go chasing a cleaner pitch, a better angle, a vision only he could see. Think like Garrett, someone said, not as advice but as an attempt to give the blank map a mind. They checked ledges on the east face that looked reachable only from above. They flew the shadowed clefts that never see noon sun. They edged the ship along a pale water streak where a rappel line might land. From above, the world offered 1,000 places to hide a person, and not a single place to find one easily. Mid-afternoon, the air took on that high country sharpness that means the day is bending. The commander rotated teams, traded radios with fresh batteries, drew a second set of grids on clean map plastic. He circled the truck's location again with his pencil, one fixed point in a day of moving guesses, and tapped the circle with the side of the pen as if he could squeeze more out of it. The spotter in the helicopter shifted and looked south. A smear of high cloud had crept into the blue. Not much. Just a brushstroke. The pilot glanced at his instruments, then at the far ridges. Little things changed first. The wind cut colder across the door opening. The rotors bit harder to hold. Position? The radio hissed a little more between transmissions. On the ground, a team topping a rise felt it as a push on the chest. Jackets zipped, voices dropped. The spruce creaked in one low, speaking note. They had covered the obvious, and most of the nearly obvious. They had flown lines that made sense, and walked lines that only barely did. Nothing popped. The maps filled with pencil scars that meant we looked. The commander capped his marker and watched the sky take on a darker brush at the horizon, and then the weather made its own decision. The first drops were harmless. Dark coins on dusty windshields, a soft tapping on the canopy roof. Radios crackled with routine check-ins and no one flinched. Showers happen in the high country. You put on a shell and keep moving, then the temperature slipped. The rain sharpened, turned grainy on the skin. Sleet hissed across the plywood maps and stuck to the plastic like sugar. The helicopter crew chief ran a gloved hand along the skid and watched beads of ice form in a line. He looked at the pilot. The pilot looked at the ridge. "Bring it home," the commander said into the mic, voice level, eyes on the sky. Up valley, team leads felt it too. Jacket zipped all the way. Fingers numbed on trekking poles. The ridgeline blurred, then disappeared entirely. What had been a long gray curtain drew tight. Radios began to stack. Copy. Visibility dropping. Footing slick. Requesting turnaround. The sleet thickened and changed again. Snow. Not a postcard drift. Wet, heavy, fast. It filled boot prints as they were made. It coated rock slabs with a thin deceit, disguising edges, turning friction to ice. A spotter tried to keep the helicopter hovering along a wall and watched the altimeter jump as downdrafts played with the ship. Enough. The pilot nosed out, turned for the trailhead and set down hard and careful. The rotors wound down into a ringing quiet that sounded like a decision. Ground teams pivoted from search to stay alive. Poles shortened. Steps slowed. Calls into the wind stopped. Breath was for balance. They followed their own flagging back, orange tags bright against suddenly white brush. At the creek crossing, a volunteer slipped, sat down in cold water and swore once, low, ashamed, then hauled himself up and moved. Nobody laughed. The mountain had changed the terms. At the command post, the canopy sagged under new weight. Someone knocked snow free with the flat of a hand. The generator coughed. Steam rose from the heater vent and men and women leaned close to it without looking like they were leaning. The commander took a dry towel to the map and smeared the grease pencil into gray weather all its own. He put a straight edge down, drew a box around the day's grids, capped the marker, and stood still for 3 long seconds. "Pull 'em," he said. Trucks idled at the lot's edge, defrosters fighting. When the first teams came in, their faces were red from wind and raw from snow that had stung like sand. They logged out, stripped wet gloves, held them over the heater duct, and stared at the phones on the table that hadn't rung for anyone. No tent found, no rope, no color against the rock, nothing. Word came from the pilot, grounded until further notice. Ice on blades was a bad coin flip. Everyone understood. The white kept falling, softer now but steady, as if the day had decided to erase itself. By late afternoon, the command post shrank. The big actions, launch, grid, recover, gave way to small ones: coil lines, dry lenses, label memory cards, stack-flagged stakes back into a plastic bin. A volunteer carried a cardboard box of uneaten sandwiches to the tailgate and covered it with a tarp. Someone wrote "charged" on 2 radio batteries and set them in a row like pieces on a board. The field log thickened with negative and no sign. The winter window was early this year. Everyone said it without saying it. You could try to punch one more day if the sun returned, but the mountain had spoken in the oldest language it had. Not now. At dusk, the commander called Marianne. He said what he could say and did not say what he couldn't. The status shifted by a word. No longer an active rescue pushing outward by the hour, but a missing persons case waiting for a break. A reactive posture. Watch the forecast. Stand by. Trucks pulled out one by one, taillights threading through trees. The last sound was the generator winding down, then the soft hiss of new snow on canvas. The lot returned to stillness. The dark green truck sat where it had sat. In its glove box, 2 satellite phones lay quiet and ready, charged for a call that never came. When people leave the mountain keeps the answers. By the time the official maps were rolled and boxed, Alistair Finch was already unrolling his own. Not the plastic laminated kind, but dog-eared 7.5-minute quads with coffee stains at the corners and pencil scars that looked like the record of a nervous hand. He spread them on the motel bed in Lander, set a notebook on each corner to keep them flat, and opened Garrett's climbing journals beside them. Marianne had handed him the journals the night before. She didn't say much, just that Garrett trusted him. Inside were neat, compact entries: dates, grades, temps, wind direction, a note here and there that read like code. Clean seam left of water streak, traverse under eyebrow, belay possible. He'd draw tiny profiles of walls, then put a circle where a ledge might be. No names for the lines, only arrows and questions. Alistair circled a dozen notations with a blunt pencil and called 3 friends who understood what those arrows meant. They were locals, lean from winters of skinning and summers on granite. Not certified for search, but fluent in this rock. They met at dawn in a parking lot that smelled like cold fuel and old rope. Their packs were heavier than they looked. Their voices were quiet in that way. Experienced partners are before a hard day. The storm hadn't truly left. The sky had cleared, but cold clung to the stone, and thin ice lacquered anything that held shadow. They moved anyway. The plan wasn't to repeat the obvious. It was to follow the language in Garrett's notebooks and the logic of his preferences. He liked clean crack systems over loose blocks. He avoided gullies that funneled rockfall. He distrusted chalky holds that looked too easy. If the standard line drifted right, he'd test left to see if the rock told a truer story. They hiked in fast, breath white in the air, then roped up at the base of a pale sweep that only showed a weakness if you stared too long. Fingers went numb at the first belay. Metal bit colder than skin could handle. They moved with that quiet rhythm you hear on serious days. Short commands, rope sliding, cams clinking as if counting time. On a third pitch, Alistair paused at a hairline seam and brushed it with the back of his glove. A placement scar. Old. Could be anyone's. He set a micronut and eased higher, eyes cutting left to a shadowed band that might hide a stance. The stance existed, if you were willing to call a boot length a stance. He clipped a rusted bolt hanger, the kind only stubborn optimists drill on bad days. It meant people had been here sometime. It did not mean anything about 2 missing climbers. They kept at it for hours, then days. The routine hardened into a loop. Motel maps, frost-stiff harnesses, a climb that asked for full attention, a descent by headlamp with breath crystals and the kind of silence that hurts your ears. They ate standing up, Stoves hissing, gloves steamed dry over flames. In the mornings, they reread Garrett's lines. Escape under roof, hidden alcove where wind dies. Those notes felt like breadcrumbs thrown into a river. On the fourth day, a partner found a bleached strand of old cord buried in a crack. They measured it with their hands and smiled without smiling. It might have been his. It might have been no one's. Granite keeps everything and nothing, gear from last season, from last decade. The mountain collects stories and forgets names. They pushed into terrain the helicopter couldn't read, a sideways world of traverses that made no photographic sense. Twice they reached ledges that looked exactly like the ones climbers brag about in trip reports. Perfect, improbable, safe from wind. Both were empty. No coil of rope, no blue dry bag. Only grit, a feather, a candy wrapper flattened to silver by time. At night, Alistair traced a finger along a sketch of the south face and wondered what had pulled Garrett away from the page everyone else followed. A cleaner move? A quieter stance? A feeling only a partner could guess at? He pressed the pencil to the margin and wrote. He would have chased shelter, not style, with Della. The fifth day broke brittle and bright. They climbed higher than was sensible for the hour and came down faster than was comfortable for the knees. Still nothing. Not a dropped carabiner, not a scuffed edge that said recent, not a print that outlived noon sun. Back at the truck, Alistair laid Garrett's journals flat and smoothed a page with the palm of his hand. The notes were clear. The mountain was not, if not the classic lines. Where did they go? After the trucks left the trailhead and the last boot print filled with new snow, time didn't restart so much as flatten. Days slid over each other, smooth and quiet, until only their edges showed. Marianne kept the house the way it had been the week they left. Della's room stayed warm with her colors. Posters on the wall, a stack of paperbacks on the nightstand, a hair tie around a lamp base like she might reach for it in a minute. A climbing pack leaned in the corner, chest strap buckled as if the room itself had decided to hold it together. In the garage, Garrett's workshop waited. Wrenches on hooks, tape labeled in block letters, a half-finished jig clamped to the bench. Dust landed softly and she brushed it away with the back of her hand, the way you brush crumbs from a child's shirt. The sheriff's office shifted too, less like a door slamming, more like a drawer sliding. The Beckwith file thickened with maps, GPS tracks, weather notes, interview transcripts. When there were no new pages to add, it left the active shelf and settled into cold storage with everything else time had turned into questions. A barcode on the spine, a place on the list. People were kind in ways that tried not to hurt. At the grocery store, they pressed her hand and said, "Thinking of you," and then looked at the bananas like they were suddenly fascinating. The early flood of casseroles became a slow tide, then a memory. Friends learned to talk about other things. Marianne learned to listen. At night, she pulled out a legal pad and wrote what she remembered from the last normal morning, afraid that forgetting small things would be a second loss. The smell of Garrett's coffee. The song Della hummed without knowing. The way the door clicked shut when it was finally closed. The first flicker back toward the mountain didn't come from a search plan. It came from a fisherman 3 summers later. Off trail, working a cold, clear creek, he spotted a glint in the water and reached into the current. When he brought his hand up, a hex-shaped climbing nut sat in his palm. Metal scuffed, wire kinked, wedged rock still clinging to it like a memory. He knew the story. Everyone who loved the range did. He marked the spot, packed out the piece, and walked it into the sheriff's office. A detective compared the brand and size to a list of Garrett's usual gear, the way you hold one silhouette against another. It matched the kind he favored. It also matched what half the serious climbers in the region used. The creek could have carried it from anywhere. The small hope was real, then thin, then gone. The file got a new page. The case did not get a new direction. The internet found the story next. In a quiet thread on an old climbing forum, an anonymous handle drew a line from a business loan to a cruel conclusion. A local blog inflated that whisper into a headline. It moved like rumors move, fast without proof, sticky without facts. Marianne read it once and felt something colder than anger. It was a theft of a man who wasn't there to answer. The cold case detective assigned to clean up the digital spill went through bank statements and loan terms, insurance amounts and payment histories. Solvent. Ordinary. No cash pulls. No runway being built to anywhere else. He wrote a short addendum that read like a verdict. Financial motive unsupported. The rumor collapsed, but it left a mark the way a thumb leaves oil on glass. By then, the story had become a kind of local folklore. New season, same cautionary tale at the gear shop counter. The expert father and the strong daughter, the truck at Big Sandy, the two satellite phones found warm with charge and cold with meaning. Guides told the tale the way you point out a cornice, so people would respect edges. The mountain added it to its long ledger of names and dates that begin with confidence and end with quiet. Inside the house, grief hardened into routines that looked like care. Fresh flowers on the table every Sunday. Della's window opened on the first warm day of spring. A new filter in the furnace before the first freeze. Marianne left a small white card on the garage pegboard with 2 words in her handwriting. Still here. Ideas thinned out at the sheriff's office. Theories turned to versions of the same version. Accident, misstep, storm. The one detail no one could solve sat like a coin no one could spend. Why were the satellite phones in the truck? Time didn't solve it. Time made it stranger. 9 years passed and the mountain looked the same. Stone that didn't care how long a story took. Chloe Vance and Ben Carter came for their own line. Light packs and strong habits the way modern climbers move. Efficient, quiet, focused on the next 3 moves, not the next 3 days. They studied weather on their phones the night before and watched wind arrows bend across the face. The forecast said calm by noon. Good enough to try. By late afternoon on day 3, they were thin with effort and looking for a place to stop. Ben led a seam that barely took gear. The rock felt like cold glass under his fingertips. He paused to rest a forearm and saw a dull glitter to his left, something straight, too regular for nature. He squinted. A bolt hanger, rusted orange against gray. He clipped, breathed, and called down. Old hardware, Chloe answered, voice tight through the wind. Why here? A second hanger sat 20 feet farther, then a third arcing toward shadow. It wasn't an obvious path up. It was a traverse to nowhere visible. They followed anyway. The line felt like a sentence someone had started years ago and abandoned mid-thought. The wall breathed a steady wind, but ahead, the shadowed alcove looked different. The air there seemed to hold still. Ben reached the lip and saw fabric moving. Soft, not snapping, something hung and half-sheltered like a small tent without ground. He clipped into an old anchor and edged in. The portaledge drifted in slow inches, tethered to webbing that had bleached to the color of bone. The frame was dull aluminum. The fabric had faded to a tired gray. It looked intact but old in the way gear gets old on a wall. Sun-faded, scratched, tired. Chloe came across and clipped next to him. The alcove muted the wind. Their breath sounded loud. The little platform held 3 things. A blue dry bag slumped by the rock, a neat circle of climbing rope coiled with care, and a red sleeping bag zipped almost to its top. Nothing was scattered. Nothing looked panicked. That detail order took a moment to settle. People who flee do not coil rope like that. Chloe lowered herself onto the edge of the portaledge and tested it with her weight. The fabric groaned but held. She reached for the dry bag first, hands slow. The plastic was cracked and stiff. Inside, a water filter, a small first aid kit almost empty, 2 wrappers from freeze-dried meals. No notebook, no phone, no message. Her eyes went to the sleeping bag. The red was dusty and faded. A single grass tuft had rooted in a fold of fabric as if the mountain had tried to claim it. Near the top, where a pillow might sit, the bag rose in a small mound under the nylon. Chloe swallowed and touched the zipper pull. Hold a sec, Ben said, but he didn't stop her. They both knew what training said. Document, don't disturb. They also knew what a human mind does when a question sits right in front of it. The zipper was stubborn and gritty. She worked it back and forth until the teeth gave a short metallic skip and started to move. Nylon parted. Inside lay a bundled fleece jacket rolled tight. That explained the mound. She pushed it aside gently. Beneath it, something pale showed, smooth and curved. For an unreal blink, her brain made it into something else. A shell, a shaped stone, a piece of driftwood carried up by a joke of time. Then the zipper cleared another inch. The object turned slightly as if the wall itself had breathed on it. Twin dark hollows faced the sky. Chloe gasped and rocked back against her tether. Ben reached an elbow to steady her and leaned in just far enough to see. A skull rested where a head would rest, the rest of the body hidden by the bag. The eye sockets were empty and absolute. They didn't touch anything else. Training returned like a hand on the shoulder. Chloe lifted her phone, hands shaking, and took wide shots. Then closer frames of the setup, anchors. Webbing, the coil of rope, the blue bag, the red bag, the way the bag's corners were tied with short lengths of cord to the portaledge frame, so wind could not rip it free. Ben pulled his own device, marked GPS, took a screen capture. There was no cell service. The sun had tipped toward the horizon and painted the far ridge orange. The beauty felt like an insult. Neither of them wanted to spend the night anywhere near the alcove. They clipped out in silence, reversed the traverse, and began the long descent. Every rappel done double-checked and slow, every anchor eyed like a threat. At the ground, the light was gone. They bivouacked lower in the night, sat with their backs to stone, and spoke only once about what they had seen. The mountain had let them walk to a place where time had stopped and then let them walk away again. This wasn't a campsite. It was a grave suspended in air. 2 mornings later, the mountain took on the look of an operating room. A helicopter beat a steady rhythm over Hooker's Stone, hovering long enough for 2 elite rescuers to clip to a long line and swing toward the wall. The ship peeled away and the cliff went quiet again except for radios and the small scrape of metal on granite. This wasn't a scene you could tape off. It had to be built where it hung. The rescuers established a fresh anchor above the alcove, equalized it, then rappelled down into the shadow with body cameras rolling. Every move was deliberate. Nothing touched without a photograph first. At a temporary base on a wider ledge below, Detective Rossi watched the live feed beside a forensic anthropologist and a crime scene technician. The tech called the angles like a director, wide of the alcove. Hold close on bolt hangers. Good. Measure distance rope coil to blue bag. Use the folding rule. Log it. The portaledge looked smaller now that it was surrounded by process. The rescuers shot a full frame, then moved clockwise. Anchors, webbing. The bleached slings clove hitched to the frame, the neat coil of rope with its tail tucked, the blue dry bag slumped against rock, the red sleeping bag secured to the frame with 2 short cords, one at the foot end, one near the hood, knots clean and purposeful. Inventory began in place. Carabiners brand and gate type called out and repeated back. Cams and nuts, sizes, colors count. Rope, diameter, manufacturer, lot code from the faded sheath tag. Slings, dates if visible. The tech cross-referenced in real time against the old list from 2013. Receipts, photos, notes from Garrett's partner. Piece after piece matched the gear the Beckwiths owned. One absence stood out. A harness that should have been Garrett's was not in the mix. Della's harness, smaller with a cosmetic nick on the left leg loop described in an earlier interview, was present. Bundled with soft goods. Only when the documentation looped back to the beginning did they move to recovery. The blue dry bag came first. Photographed, opened under camera. Contents removed and bagged, water filter. A small first aid kit with most of the blister items gone. 2 flattened meal pouches, nothing else. No notebook. No phone. The sleeping bag required a different quiet. The rescuers cut the 2 accessory cords that secured it to the frame, then slid the entire bag intact into a rigid stretcher sheath. The zipper that Chloe had started was left where it was, weight transferred. Lines tightened. The helicopter returned and took the load on a long line, drifting away toward the valley, a single shape against a great wall. In the lab's clean light, the story sharpened but did not soften. Dental records gave the first hard answer. The remains in the red bag were Della's. The anthropologist, Dr. Thorne, worked with patience and gloves, and the kind of narration meant to steady a room. He noted weathering, animal activity, sun bleaching, the expected changes after 9 high country years. Then he stopped at the lower right leg. There, he said, more to the record than to the people. The tibia showed a severe spiral fracture with displacement, the fibula stressed in sympathy. Not a hairline, not a bruise to the bone, a break that erased mobility. He traced the path with a gloved finger, twist, torque, failure, and explained in simple words what the bones already said. Della would not have stood, would not have downclimbed, would not have managed a rappel. Pain would have been massive. Blood flow and swelling would have complicated everything. Rossi looked again at the scene photos. The cords tying the sleeping bag to the portaledge frame. The way the corners were secured so wind could not pry her loose. It was care, not accident. Someone had arranged this with time and intent, then left. She returned to the ledge shots and zoomed on details that now felt like sentences. The coil of rope pressed flat by years. the angles of the anchor slings, the empty space where a second harness might have been. She wrote a short line in her notebook, stabilized plus secured, current deliberate departure, then underlined it once. The report that went into the file read like the shape of a father's decision. An injury, a shelter, a tie-down, a promise. The promise was the leaving. If she couldn't move, someone had to. Fast. The discovery on the portaledge gave the search a new spine. No more wide grids. No more maybe basins. Detective Rossi drew a red pin where the anchors bit into Hooker's face and laid a thin pencil line straight down. Fastest way off, Alistair said, tapping the map. In a crisis, you don't wander for elegance. You point your body at the valley. 2 Jenny Lake rescuers roped up at first light. Their brief was simple and brutal. Start at the empty anchor above the alcove and read the rock downward the way a desperate climber would. They clipped into the fresh rig, eased over the lip, and the mountains swallowed them to their helmets. They moved in short rappels, pausing at features that could hold decision, narrow ledges, water-streaked slabs, gullies that funneled both melt and mistake. On every stance, they scanned for the small proofs of passage. A scuffed patch of lichen, a bright scrape where metal had kissed stone, a thread of sun-bleached cord someone might have left in a hurry. Their radios stayed calm but spare. Rope free. On you. Negative on sign. The first 100 feet showed nothing but age. Ice had polished the faces. Summer thunder had sluiced grit into lines that once might have read like handwriting, and now read like clean slate. The rescuers took out a folding rule and measured the distance from anchor to anchor, thinking like legs that hurt and hands that needed steel. Each choice favored directness over comfort, speed over beauty. They found a gully and stepped into it. The walls narrowed until packs brushed both sides. A black water streak ran the center, proof of 1,000 snowmelt days. Here, a careful man might hammer metal if he had to because cracks were thin and gear could lie. The lead rescuer palmed a seam, then another, then stopped. Hold, he said, voice low. Not for safety, but for respect. He leaned close. The camera on his chest caught the shape before the radio carried the words. An old piton, rusted, driven deep into a hairline crack. Eye turned slightly downward the way someone sets it when gravity is winning. He brushed it with a glove. It did not move. The brand stamp had softened to a ghost, but the style matched the Beckwith era. Thin, tapered, the kind of iron you swing when nothing else will keep you. He called measurements into the radio. Elevation, bearing, distance below the last stance. The tech at the ledge logged it with a pencil that squeaked on damp paper. Photos from 3 angles, a scale card, a quick video sweep to show context. The piton was not a souvenir. It stayed where it had held. Path of least delay, Alistair murmured at the map, tracing air where the radios traced stone. He was moving, hope steepened. The rescuers bled another 100 feet of rope into the gully, eyes hungrier now. If there was one anchor, there could be another. If there were 2, a pattern might draw itself. But the gully widened and lost its walls. Melt had scoured the surface to clean stone, then to loose rock that shifted under weight. Below, the mountain unraveled into talus fans, each a conveyor belt that sorted decades of small things into the same gray. They combed both edges where a fall might have thrown gear. They checked the base of ribs where rope ends like to snag. They found an old goat track, a feather, a bottle cap pressed flat and faceless by time. They did not find a second anchor. They did not find cloth or cord or bone. They tried a parallel line, then a third, each chosen by the same logic. Straight, quick, possible. The rock gave them silence. Afternoon wind rose, dragging grit across helmets. Radios ticked with battery warnings. The map at the ledge took on pencil scars that meant looked, and a small box around the piton that meant only. Rossi stood back from the plastic and watched the day shrink to that one marked point. The story they were building had a verb, left and an object, down, and then a space where a line should be. They pulled ropes at dusk, coils heavy with melt. The piton stayed in the gully, a single word in a book with the next page torn out. A path marked once, then erased by years. The break came from someone who wasn't looking for people at all. A wildlife biologist from the university was flying a drone to count bighorn sheep, high, quiet passes over country. No one walks unless they must. The screen showed gray rock and brown grass, a bowl ringed by cliffs like a stone amphitheater. As he eased the drone across the basin, something not natural flickered at the edge of the frame. A shred of color, thin and torn, snagged on a low, thorny bush. He dipped lower. The image steadied. Faded blue fabric, frayed to threads. 10 yards away, pale shapes lay among the rocks, small, scattered, sun-bleached. He marked the coordinates, saved the flight log, and made a call. A helicopter lifted Detective Rossi, Dr. Thorne, and 2 high-angle rescuers toward a place the map barely named. Landing was impossible. Walls hemmed the basin in on 3 sides, and the 4th fell to broken talus. The pilot held a hover, and the crew clipped to the long line. They swung once under the ship like pendulums, then touched down in dust and rotor wash. When the helicopter peeled away, the silence felt heavy, like the inside of a shut door. It was a trap of a basin. No trails in, no easy lines out. Stone heat pooling even in thin air. The rescuers set a small perimeter with bright flags, more for their own minds than for crime scene order. Wind and animals had already done their worst across the years. The fabric was a jacket, or what was left of one, blue turned gray, cuffs torn to lace, zipper teeth missing in a long skip. Nearby lay bone. Not a whole human shape, weather had taken that, but a scatter of fragments. Long bone shafts eroded to ovals, a partial scapula smoothed by grit, a kneecap cupped with dirt. Dr. Thorne knelt and spoke softly into the recorder, noting weathering rodent gnaw, sun crack lines that marked hot days and cold nights stacked by the hundreds. This was not a quick ID. The team collected carefully, bagging what the basin had not yet ground to powder. Soft earth yielded a button. A few feet away, a torn strap end with a rusted buckle. Then a shout, not loud but different. Metal. A rescuer had seen a glint half buried near the base of the cliff. He brushed sand away with 2 fingers and lifted a small, oddly shaped plate, bent and scratched with holes like an idea of a ladder. Not climbing gear. Not a buckle. Titanium by the look and feel. Light in the hand. Uncorroded where the scratches cut. Rossi's eyes went to a line she had underlined months earlier in Marianne's first interview. Jaw surgery after a cycling crash. She called the medical examiner's office, then the hospital, then the surgeon's old practice, working the chain from memory to records. Hours later, a fax landed at the lab. Diagrams and notes from 15 years before. Model, size, hole pattern, curve. Back in town, under clean light, the plate from the basin lay beside the diagram. The hole spacing matched. The curve matched. The screw wear matched the surgeon's notes about bone thickness. It was not just similar. It was the same design bent to the same human face. Dr. Thorne gave the quiet sentence everyone had been waiting for. Identification supported by surgical hardware. In the file, the name shifted from missing to found. The map told the rest, or enough of it to draw a line with. The basin sat miles east of the face where Della had been secured. No one's descent route, no one's second choice. To stand there was to be off every page. Between the ledge and this bowl, the terrain twisted through gullies and blind ribs that turned strong legs into slow mistakes. A storm could erase directions in a minute. Darkness could turn cliffs into flat shadow. Garrett had left in a hurry with a single goal. Somewhere between the first anchor and an imagined valley floor, the mountain took his sense of the world and set it down in the wrong place. He didn't just fall, he got lost where no one goes. The evidence doesn't speak in full sentences. It gives fragments, edges, gestures, and then asks you to read the shape. Start with the ledge. The portaledge wasn't chaos. It was arrangement. Anchors equalized. Webbing sound. A rope coiled with the tail tucked, not dropped in haste. The red sleeping bag lashed at 2 corners to the frame so the wind couldn't take it. Inside, Della. Dental records gave her name back. The tibia told the condition. A severe spiral break that turned movement into impossibility. Nothing about that fracture says walk out. Everything about it says stay warm, stay put. The blue dry bag held a water filter, a small first aid kit nearly spent, a couple of empty meal pouches. Enough to say a triage happened. Enough to say supplies were counted. Not enough to turn a ledge into a long-term camp. You don't secure a bag to the frame unless you mean to leave and trust the knot more than the weather. What's missing on the ledge matters too. Della's harness was present, bundled with soft gear. Garrett's was not. If he was the one who tied the bag down, and every piece of the scene points that way, He left wearing his own harness, taking what a fast descent demands and little more. Follow him off the anchor. The quickest line is not the prettiest. It's the one that points at the valley. The rescuers who retraced that logic found what a man under pressure might have left. A single old piton, hammered deep in a water-worn gully where clean cracks thin to nothing. The piton doesn't prove a whole route. It proves a moment, a place where a careful person needed iron and made it hold. After that, the mountain erases. Meltwater scours gully floors. Freeze-thaw breaks lichen to dust. A decade turns scuffs into plain stone. The searchers found no second anchor, no torn strap, no scrap. The gully widened, lost its walls, and fell away into talus that sorts everything. Pine cones, pebbles, decades into the same color. The page ends midline. Pick the line up again miles east in a trap-like basin the maps barely admit exists. A shredded blue jacket, scattered bones shaped by sun and weather, and a titanium jaw plate that matched a surgeon's diagram from 15 years before. Not a theory, hardware. The name that had lived in a file as missing moved to found. Between those 2 points, the ledge and the basin, are the parts we cannot watch. We have the weather logs, a front that arrived earlier than anyone wanted, pushing sleet into snow and flattening visibility into a gray that swallows ridgelines whole. We have the terrain, ribs and gullies that look alike until they don't, water streaks that promise easy travel until they tilt to nowhere. We have the human factors no map shows, exhaustion, cold, the clock that ticks louder when someone you love is waiting and hurt. The story that fits the pieces is not elaborate. During the climb, Della fell or twisted hard enough to fracture the lower leg beyond use. Garrett stabilized her as best he could, chose the safest pocket of wall he could find, anchored a portaledge out of the direct wind, and secured her bag so the mountain couldn't shake her loose. He took the rope and the essentials, put on his harness, and left in daylight racing weather that was already bending the day toward trouble. He moved for speed, not style, favoring gullies and watercourses that promised gravity's help. In the narrowing stone, he placed a piton to keep himself honest. Then conditions shifted. Fog, sleet, the blunt disorientation that happens when every surface becomes the same blank. He strayed, one ridge too far, one gully too deep, and the landscape gathered him into a bowl you don't choose. Whether he fell once and finished or fell in stages doesn't change the end. The jaw plate tells us who was there when the basin went quiet again. What we cannot know sits beside what we do. There are no phone logs from a phone he didn't carry, no journal page left under a rock, no final message. For Della, the bones say she could not climb, could not descend, could not save herself. For Garrett, the iron in a crack and the plate in the dirt say he tried. And then the country took him where help could not find him in time. It is, in the plainest reading, a story about love meeting landscape and losing on terms the landscape has held for a very long time. A father makes a shelter, ties a knot, and goes. A storm moves the horizon closer. A map drawn in a garage meets rock that doesn't care about lines, but a single choice still breaks the story in half. Some endings arrive with signatures and seals. This one came as a quiet service on a bright morning. 2 simple urns side by side, a handful of friends, and the wind moving across short grass as if it were turning pages. Marianne kept it small. She read no eulogy. She set down no program. She stood with both hands around a single flower and said the names once, steady. A pastor offered a short prayer that did not try to explain mountains or time. When it was done, people touched her shoulder and stepped back to give the day room. Afterward, the house looked the way it always had because she had always kept it that way. Della's door still opened to the same poster, the same stack of paperbacks. Garrett's bench still held the tools in the same order, a pencil still tucked behind a hook where he left it the week they drove to Big Sandy. There were answers now, or most of one. Della's ledge explained the silence on the wall, the break, the tie down, the care. The basin answered the question of a father, the hardware, the distance, the wrong place no one would choose. The report in the file was short and precise and human. It read like love inside a storm. But there was a hinge the whole story swung on, and it never turned. 2 satellite phones, both charged, both waiting, both left in the glove box. It is possible to call that an oversight and leave it there. Even careful men miss things when the day is full and the weather looks friendly. Routine can blur into habit. Habit can hide a blind spot. You pack ropes and cams and slings and stoves and food and medical kits and a dozen small backups. And the one thing that breaks the rule of the range, no service up high, stays under an owner's manual in a tidy cab. It is also possible to imagine a reason that made sense at the time and fell apart later. Maybe the phone was only for the drive home and the check-in from the pavement. Maybe coverage maps were misunderstood. Maybe the wait felt like a luxury on a line that promised to be quick. Maybe one of them meant to reach into the glove box after tightening a strap and simply didn't. No record tells us. There is no receipt that says, "Remember this." No note on the dash, no line in a journal that translates a choice we live beside now. The mountain kept its secret the way it keeps snow and shadow and let everything else go. Marianne did not take up the argument. She placed the phones in a drawer in the hallway where spare keys live and thanked the officers who brought back what they could. She opened the drawer sometimes and closed it again without touching anything. Life made new shapes around the old ones. 2 chairs at the table, 1 coat on the hook, flowers on Sundays. Grief became lighter and stranger, the way a pack feels when you've taken out weight you learn to carry. In the climbing shops and at the trailhead signboards, the story changed from a question to a caution. About storms, about choices, about how one missing tool can move a line from hard to impossible. The name stayed. So did the detail that doesn't resolve. The unanswered pivot sits there for all of us who tell stories about risk and rescue and love. Why were the sat phones left in the truck? The video you're watching cannot finish that sentence. It can only show what the evidence shows and stop where the rock refuses another hold. The rest is what we bring to it, our own habits, our own checklist, the people we tie our knots for. If you've made it here, tell us what you think happened with the phones. Simple oversight? A routine that became a blind spot? A reason we'll never know? Share your read in the comments, respectfully for the family and for everyone who searches these ranges when weather turns and light runs out. If this kind of careful human story matters to you, subscribe for more episodes. We publish new deep dives like this every week. And if you hike or climb, take one thing from this case into your own pack. The small choices are the big ones, and the mountain never explains.